These are probably going to be the cutest switches you've seen in a while. Themed after the popular anime Spy X Family, these switches deliver on their promise of being both cute and incredibly powerful. In our last switch review, we took a look at the X switches from B-Sun, and we actually have a few similarities that are worth looking at. So, let's get into the specs. These switches were designed by PH Studio and were lubed and manufactured by B-Sun, which recently manufactured the X switches as well. Actually, there's quite a few similarities between these switches and the X switches. First off, both of these switches use a modified LY material for their stems, and have a single stage extended spring. For our top and bottom housings, the Anya switches use POM, while the X switches use POC. Both of these switches come factory lubed with 205 and 105G, but the Anya switches do come with the option of being factory lubed and one with no factory lube. Going into the color scheme, we have a light green stem, a light pink top housing, and a darker pink bottom housing. One thing specifically I find cool is that if you ever want an entire board themed after Anya, you can be proud to show off your miniature Anyas inside your board. So these switches have an operating force of 42 grams and have a bottoming out force of 50 grams, which is a bit less compared to the X switches. Also, our total travel comes in at 3.2 millimeters, which can seem quite long. The fact is, many people don't like long pole switches, but even if the Anya switches are long pole linears, they don't have the same stiff bottoming out feeling like some of the switches do. This is due to the fact that while the switch has an extended pole, the bottom housing is actually not as thick as many other long pole switches. Now, these switches were originally released in 2022, but the batch we have today is one of their newer batches to come out. Specifically, the lubrication techniques for these switches were greatly improved over the past few years, and now we have an actually good and consistent factory lubing job that is used within B-Sun's newer switches and updated switches. Usually, many people don't like having factory loop switches due to their inconsistency, but thankfully these switches are ready to change your mind about that. Now, to make sure we can accurately compare the Anya switches, we'll be using the same board config between two different sound tests. For this config, we'll be using our Saka 68 with some case foam, our GMK Momo Yume keycaps, and finally our newest addition to the Near Lucid wardrobe, a felt key mat to help solidify the sound signature coming from the board. First, we'll take a listen to the same new X switches we were talking about before, and after that we'll listen to our Anya switches. So the Anya switches sound really good. They appear to be on the poppier side and are also quite loud as well. One thing I really liked was how controlled the sound was. There were minor sound differences between each switch, and overall sounds very good for a linear switch made of POM and LY. The bottoming out sound wasn't harsh and it actually sounded very soft. But one thing that did throw me off a little was when I looked at the switches up close, there does seem to be a little bit of scratch you can hear. But no worries about that, since honestly it isn't very noticeable while typing. Plus, if you ever need to, you can always lube up these switches a bit more and eliminate that scratch. One thing to note is that I personally love linear switches, and these feel really amazing to me. The switch gives a relatively quick pushback, which feels really good after comparing them to a few other switches with different levels of pushback. The use of the LY material for the stem really helped give these switches a very smooth typing experience. Compared to the X switches, these aren't as smooth as they are, but actually come close second to them. Overall, these are very smooth and feel very soft. The factory lubing also helps give it a smoother experience, and thanks to Bsun's new techniques, we get a more consistent lubing job that only gets a tiny inconsistent switch every about 20 to 30 switches from what I see. Thankfully, stem wobble is not an issue here. The stem is very well secured and is supported tightly within the housing. Also, this tightness doesn't affect the force needed to press the switch, it just holds the stem very nicely in place. So yeah, these might be the cutest switches you've seen in a while, but don't forget that these are powerful in their own way as well. Personally, I love the manga series and the anime too, and I feel like it's super nice to see a theme switch or keycap every so often that doesn't only focus on this theme and just straight up ignore the overall quality. We'll be taking a look at more theme switches and also be experimenting a bit more with the Anya switches on our Twitch channel soon. So if you'd like to see more interesting sound tests and configs, please check us out because you'll never know what you'll find unless you see it for yourself.